I believe deals are coming in a big way. I was looking at assets a couple of weeks ago. They're selling for the debt. Big multifamily complexes selling for the debt. They still don't make sense with the interest rates. But when they do, I think there's going to be some incredible opportunity.
One thing I like about my market in the Midwest, we don't have that volatility. We are a very slow growth market. When you go back to the fundamentals of real estate, the reason why I chose to invest in real estate 10 years ago instead of stocks or bonds or whatever else, I knew I had some modicum of control over real estate.
People get scared about, recession or whatnot, but with crisis comes opportunity. Potential incredible opportunities could be a big transfer of wealth. Welcome back to Lifetime Cash Flow through Real Estate Investing. I'm Rod Khleif, and I'm thrilled you're here. You're really going to enjoy today's podcast interview. It's with a gentleman named Joseph Cornwell, and he is one of the hosts of the Best Ever show, which is Joe Fairless's show, and I've been on there a couple of times. He's been on this show a couple of times. He's a big hitter in the multifamily space, and he's got a podcast where they literally go every single freaking day. So I think he got burned out, and he brought in other people, and he's friends with Joseph here, and so Joseph's a host there. So Joseph, I'm going to, rather than butchering your bio, I'm going to just have you, welcome, number one.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm just going to have you kind of give us your background and why real estate, why now you're a host of a big podcast, bring us current.
Yeah, so I started in real estate back in, 2011 technically. So I did a live-in flip. First home, just regular residential buyer.
Good timing.
Yeah, I was 21, so I bought my house early, kind of compared to a lot of my generation and my friends and things like that. But I basically made the decision like, hey, I don't want to go out and buy or rent an apartment and waste money on rent. I didn't know much about money. I didn't have a lot of money. Didn't come from a family with a ton of money. But I knew enough to say, okay, well, back then, $300 or $400 or whatever I was going to pay on rent in Cincinnati. That's where I'm from. Grew up in Cincinnati, still live there. I was like, I know throwing my money away on rent is not a good idea. So if I can qualify for a house, that's probably a smarter move. That's about as much as I knew about real estate. Is I didn't want to, throw my money out renting. So I bought my first house, fixed it up myself. If you remember those old Home Depot manuals where you could learn how to drywall and frame,
no kidding.
So this was kind of right at the YouTube was starting to become popular. But I remember going to Home Depot and buying my first, materials for my house, and they would give you like a book when you checked out. So I was reading that book and basically fixed up that first house, a lot of DIY, and kind of learned as I went.
How old were you then?
I was 21.
21 in 2011.
21 when I bought my first house. Yep.
Okay.
And so I, same time, I was actually just coming out of the police academy. So I got a 2-year degree, went to the police academy, and fixed up that house, went into my career as law enforcement, started out part-time, got a full-time job. And then,
as a patrolman?
Yes. For
how long?
I was a police officer 10 years total before
No kidding.
I
want to hear some stories. I want to hear some crazy stories there too.
Absolutely,
but we'll circle back to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So basically, I lived in a house for 3 years. I sold it, and I think I made like $41,000 just off appreciation.
Nice.
And I looked at it as, okay, I have no idea what's happening in the market. I don't know anything about real estate. All I know is I kind of bought this old lady's house and modernized it a little bit, and I made about probably 70-80% of what I would have made in a year as a cop on accident, selling a live-in flip. And that was what really opened my eyes to real estate. And I'm like, if I actually educated myself, learned about this business, there could be something here. And early on when I was a police officer, I think I looked at real estate as a path to just kind of pad my retirement. I've told this story a lot of where when I was about 25, I looked around and I saw a lot of older police officers who were, in their 50s or even 60s that were still working. They've been divorced 3, 4, 5 times. Divorce is very prevalent in the law enforcement. And
why is that, by the way?
Well, it's long hours. It changes you as a person.
Bring the work home.
Right.
Become dismissive.
Exactly. You get very cynical. You get very pessimistic. Not everybody, but generally speaking.
I could see how that could happen. You guys have to deal with so much crap.
Right.
Jesus.
Yeah. Let's just put it this way: if you look at a lot of 50, 60-year-old police officers who've been in it 25, 30, 40 years, very few of them are healthy, happy, and
right.
A happy person. Let's put it that way.
That's a shame.
So I had a good because
it's good work and it's necessary work.
Absolutely. Yeah.
This whole defund the police thing made me want to freaking bang my head.
Yeah, well, I got lucky. I got out in 21, so I was able to kind of get out the right time. Jeez. And as things were had already kind of started going down that hill.
Sorry to interrupt. Please continue.
No.
Yeah.
So I looked at it as, okay, I'm 25. I'm in this 4 going on 5 years. I have a lot of examples of what I don't want my life to look like in 30 years. And that was kind of something I've noticed throughout my whole lifetime is I had a lot of experiences where I'm like, I don't want to do that, or I don't want to be like that, which...
So those can be good lessons.
Yes, it helped me.
Yeah, you know,
I
have T-shirts in my boot camps I give out that say hashtag Ask Me How I Know, because I've made every freaking mistake you can possibly make. You know, so yeah, keep going.
So I, you know, that opened my eyes between the career 5 years in, selling my first personal residence.
Right.
I was like, okay, there's something here that I need to dive into. And then that's when I got into the real estate education space. You know, I found Bigger Pockets. I found some of your content. I found Best Ever content. I met Joe Fairless. He had a local meetup in Cincinnati. That's where he lives now. You know, and so all these things kind of dominoes started falling that led me down this path of, okay, how do I actually make money in real estate? How do I make this at a bare minimum? How do I make this a side hustle? And then, you know, as my
which
journey,
you did,
that's
how I started. You were still in the force for another 5 years.
Exactly. Yep.
So what'd you do? Start flipping? What'd you start doing?
So I looked at flipping, but I didn't like it because I looked at it as just another job. You know, I thought it was could be a well-paying job if I knew what I was doing, and maybe if I did it at scale. But to me, it was not a whole lot different than trading time for money, unless I built it into this massive scale where you know I could hire all the right people and, you know, not have to trade my time for the money and all those things. So that didn't really make sense or appeal to me at that time. This is 2015, let's say. So buy and hold made a lot more sense. And so I started working with a couple local real estate agents, and I quickly realized that most real estate agents don't know anything about investment property.
No.
Which I wouldn't have assumed that, you know, going into
it. Right. Well, and, you know, what's interesting is a lot of, on that note, you know, I teach this at my boot camp, is that, you know, if you're going to buy multifamily in a particular market, get in line with a broker or an agent, because very often a multifamily property will hit the local MLS and they haven't got a freaking clue what to do with it. They don't know how to price it. Because, you know, if somebody's bought a house from someone after they built or bought a 10-unit, 20-unit, 30-unit, but they bought a house from a realtor, they assume that realtor knows how to sell that 10, 20, or 30-unit, and they haven't got a freaking clue. They don't know how to price it or anything else. And you get some phenomenal deals that way. So anyway, just as an aside.
That's exactly what happened.
Right.
So I reached out to like a couple agents I went to high school with. I reached out to the guy that helped me buy my first house. I reached out to the agent that I bought my second house with, and I, you know, worked with them. They were showing me some rentals, and I'm like, I don't know anything about real estate, but I know more than they do. And that was you know,
eye-opening,
an eye-opening experience, right? Yeah. So I'm like, you know what? If this is the bar of what's out there in our market for investment realtors, I'm going to go ahead and get my license. So
I was just going to ask if you did that, because then you've got access to the MLS, you get commissions. I did this. What I did, I mean, I keep bringing this back to me. I'm sorry about that. I actually hired a broker to legitimize a brokerage, and because you know you have to have a broker, but if I did a deal, I got all the commission. I had access to the MLS, and I paid this guy a monthly fee, and it worked out really well for me. So I didn't want to get my broker's license again. I was a broker when I was 18, but that's smart. So you went out, got licensed. So you have access to the whole inventory of properties.
Exactly. I got my license in Ohio. So started in 2016. Then I started looking for my own deals. You know, touring my own, and I made a bunch of offers. And, you know, at the time I'm still working as a cop.
But you weren't really out there selling other people's houses. You did this just to facilitate your investment. Same.
Yes.
Right.
It was never my intention. Now, I'll get into what happened, but that was never my intention. So then I start making offers, and the whole time at the time I'm maybe saving $500 a month, you know, between my bills, overtime, details, you know, off-duty details. Maybe I would come up with $500 a month. And I'd been doing this for a couple of years.
From your police pay.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yep. And so it took me about probably 18 months till I actually found the right deal, made an offer, and got it accepted. And I watched this property get listed, and it was in the city I worked for. So I worked for a small suburb of Cincinnati. It's a little city named Deer Park. It's like 5,500 people, 1 square mile, little town.
That's small.
You know, kind of like Mayberry, honestly, you know, from
nice.
What's the show? Andy Griffith.
Right.
So it's very similar. I mean, everybody knows everybody, you know, a little tiny town. Well, I knew this house that got listed, nobody was going to buy it, because I had actually arrested some of the tenants inside of it. It was a little duplex, and I'm like, this thing is trashed. They're hoarders, nasty, drug addicts, all that stuff. And so I watched it sit on the MLS and drop about $30,000 in list price, and I think they listed it like $120 or $130 originally. So I ended up buying it for $89,000. And that was all the money I had in the world. And then I get into this thing, and I'm like, oh crap, I actually need money to fix this up.
Fix it up.
And
a lot of money.
I never even thought about that. I mean, that's how little I knew.
Wow.
Like, that wasn't even a consideration. You know?
Wow.
So I borrowed some money from my stepdad, paid him interest, fixed it up, got it rented out, paid him back. And then about a year later, I refinanced that first property, and timing ended up perfect where I actually just happened to find a 6-unit that was closer to where I live. I'm on the east side of Cincinnati. So I made an offer on the 6-unit, and I used that cash out refi, kind of bird that first duplex, got my cash out plus a little bit extra, and I used that as my down payment on my second property, which is a 6-unit. And I honestly that was really the pattern.
Just kept rolling it.
I just kept rolling, and I did, 15.
So BRRRR, by the way, if there's anybody who doesn't know what that is,
Yeah.
it's buy, renovate, refinance, repeat, where you just keep doing that model. And
Yeah.
in fact, we do it with freaking large deals
Yeah.
as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you kept rolling it, and then I just noticed in your bio that you did actually sell as an agent for a while.
Yes.
For quite a while, 9 years.
Yeah, so ultimately, as that pattern, from let's say 2017 all the way up to 2021, so there was about 4 or 5 years there where I was just burying properties. I'd buy a couple a year. As I went on, they were more scale and more volume and things like that as the money had grown. I had no intention of this, but I started kind of just documenting what I was doing. So started with like Facebook, meaning I'd take some pictures, I'd write a post, and I had no and I didn't even know enough to think, if I do this, I'm going to ultimately find partners, or I'm going to raise capital, or I'm going to find better deals. Like, none of that was the intention. It was strictly like, I think this is kind of cool.
Just to
I want
add
to tell my
value.
story. Yeah.
Same.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Sorry to keep interrupting here, but I did the same thing with this podcast.
Yeah.
When I first started it, I took free phone calls from my listeners. I had hundreds of them, 30-minute calls. I'm not going to sell you anything if I can add value, and I know that helped this thing grow in a big way. And that, and I used to say early on in the podcast, I'll never sell you anything. Now I'm a freaking liar because I sell everything, but I never planned to. We want to make God laugh. You tell him your plans.
Yeah.
But so you started posting on social media. You started getting a following, I assume. And
it was a lot of just friends and family, but it ultimately led to I have 3 businesses right now, but 2 of them are the real estate sales and the construction. They're really, it's kind of one umbrella, two departments under one company, really, but whatever, from an entity structure, it's separated. But it literally was just me posting, this is what I'm doing, and then people reaching out like, man, that's really cool. I love these properties. You're buying these really kind of crappy properties. You're making them look nice, doing the before and after, and kind of showing our construction.
Did that build
progress.
your construction business?
Yes.
So you got investors to work with you to get to do flips and things like that?
Yeah. So we do our construction business now. We do about half of our own projects, so our own multifamily, mixed use, commercial, whatever, and about half contract work.
Are you a GC now?
Yes.
Okay. So you're a general contractor.
Yeah, so we have a construction company, Realty One Stop Construction, and Realty One Stop's like my overall brand, and that we do sales as well still.
Okay.
And it's just me. I don't hire agents.
Gotcha.
Like
but
that.
You've got 15 full-time employees in the construction
side, and then we have 1 full-time admin on the real estate side.
Yeah. Yeah. Good for you, man.
Yep.
You've vertically integrated
everything's
perfectly.
We manage our own portfolio, and part of the way I built this out in my mind through the years as I continued scaling was, if I'm going to ultimately take money from either partners or limited partners as investors, I want to make sure I am able to touch every aspect of this process
and maximize cost savings.
Yes.
Which you're able to do with your own company.
Exactly.
And I'll tell you, by the way, vertically integrated, guys, means where you don't just buy properties in a specific market. You manage them. You have the construction component. You do all the pieces. That's called vertically integrating. And I will tell you, the most successful operators I see in this business are geographically specific, and they vertically integrate ultimately. And
it seems to be a lot more popular now. Like, so when I started, and again, I'm not going to act like I'm some genius. All of this just organically kind of grew. I almost kind of went where the winds had taken me. But I think the mindset behind that was, one day I'm going to continue scaling where I am going to raise capital. And I never want to go to my investors and say, we lost money on this deal because our property manager, they ripped us off, or they just stunk, which
is very common.
Is
very common.
Interviewing
I'm
people.
dealing with it right now on a couple of assets personally.
Exactly.
So, bad management.
But it's also a very common thing you hear when you're talking to investors across the country is they have, I don't want to call them excuses, but you have all these reasons why deals go bad.
Well, there's a lot of deals going bad right now, as you well know,
Yeah.
but not just because of bridge debt and whatnot, but expense ratios have gone through the roof with payroll going up, with the cost of expenses going up. And, I'd love to talk to you about the tariffs because,
Sure.
we pre-framed that a little bit before we started recording that might be a good topic because, as it sits right now, there's a 90-day hold on the tariffs with the 70 countries that have come to the negotiation table.
Yes.
But Canada and China, no, because they're playing hardball, which is stupid. But you want to speak to that a little bit? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, so the way I'm tracking this is obviously if and when and how bad the tariffs ultimately end, which, we don't really know. It's a lot of volatility right now in the discussions and negotiations and all that. But I think the way it's going to affect us on the real estate side is definitely through the construction. Part of my business now, I've moved.
Unless he wins,
sure,
unless he turns this around, which I believe he will.
Well, and that's the thing, right? We don't know how bad it's going to be. We don't know how long, if
it's even going to be bad.
If at all, right?
Right.
So it's very volatile. The problem with volatility in the market, like as we all know, like we've seen with interest rates.
We've seen it with the 10 years gone way down and popped back
right
up.
Back up, yeah.
But I think I just saw today had the biggest stock market gain in history.
Yeah.
In history, when he announced the 90-day pause.
Right.
But it's very volatile. And I
Yeah.
think that volatility is going to get people to realize maybe they should get their ass out of the stock market and focus on real estate, which, I love to say this, we've got inflation. And I don't know if you know this, in the last 4 years, 80% of the U.S. currency was created. Up to 2020, only 20% was in circulation.
Yeah.
Another 80% was created in the last 4 years. And we wonder why there's inflation.
Right.
That's what caused it. But here's the thing. With the beautiful thing about what we do in real estate is when you buy an asset, your debt's fixed.
Yeah.
And our assets are based on a multiple to net income, as you know, and rents are going to keep going up.
Yeah.
And so is our net income. So is our values.
Yes.
So
yeah, inflation. I've seen. So back to the tariff thing. The issue with concerns with tariffs are for me are a couple things. Okay. It's going to be how does it ultimately impact inflation if it if it is a long drawn out battle. Obviously, again, we don't know how long. We don't know if it's even going to happen.
Yeah,
to what extent. So
like China, for example, I mean, they're kind of painted themselves in the corner. I just read that today with Z. That if he capitulates, it makes him look really bad to the rest of the Communist Party. So he's kind of painted himself into a corner. So we'll see what happens there. That's interesting.
Right. And as we know, a lot of our material comes from China today. A lot of our lumber comes from Canada today. So you can look at lumber futures; they're way up. And that's part of. So back to the real estate and construction thing. It's like when we're bidding jobs right now, like we're bidding a couple big custom garage builds in Cincinnati, which we did a few last year, and it turned out great. The problem is I have no idea how to price these.
Cost.
It's like we're giving people like a 30-day estimate, and it's like, hey, we have no idea what's going to happen. If we don't start your project for 6, 9, 12 months, we have no idea.
We need to buy the material right freaking now.
Yeah. That's a smart thing to do too. I mean, that's definitely one way you can try to get ahead of any
the guys. I
volatility.
don't know if you saw the guys out here rebuilding my dock, and I told them I'd really like to go from wood to a composite planking on there because then my maintenance guy doesn't have to stain it every year.
Right.
And they said that his pricing on the planks went from 65 to 120.
Wow.
He's trying to negotiate something with me, but it's already impacting.
Well, that's what happens, right? These importers, whether they're wholesale, whether they're the actual retailers, they have to price in what they think is going to happen.
Right.
So people get upset about inflation. Well, a lot of inflation is guessing what's coming.
Sure.
We don't really know.
Well, I will tell you, in my opinion, the proverbial stuff needs to hit the fan only because we're $36 trillion in debt in this country. And we're barely paying the freaking interest on that debt, and so I think a recession is likely, candidly, and I think it's probably a good thing. There needs to be a reset. I mean, it's been glory days, and people get scared about recession or whatnot, but with crisis comes opportunity, right? And if you look at it like that, you look at it, your glass is half full when that happens, then there's potential incredible opportunities. Could be a big transfer of wealth. I don't know how you feel about that. If you agree, disagree, whatever.
No, I think that in general, all of that is accurate, and that's. I mean, I one thing I like about my market in the Midwest, speaking about the
more
Midwest,
stable.
Exactly. We were talking a little bit about that, before we started the show. It's like we didn't have that huge 30-40% rent bumps, in most of our neighborhoods.
Did you say you're in Cincy or Cleveland?
Cincinnati.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, so it's we don't have that volatility. We are a very slow growth market. We do have positive population trends. A lot of that's from immigration, legal and illegal immigration. But it's a situation where even if we do have a pretty significant recession that I think is an accurate, I think that is a good possibility, right? That we're not going to have that huge fall off in values.
You didn't back when in 08, 09. Right. I've got, by the way, I have several assets in Cincinnati. I don't know, probably over 1,000 units. I was thinking Cleveland in my head. I was thinking Shaker Heights, but Cincinnati I'm very, very familiar with.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that offline.
Sure.
Okay. So, and there's a lot of rundown properties in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Certain neighborhoods especially.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the way I look at Cincinnati, and you can take this exact same ideology to a lot of these Midwest, cities, right? Mm-hmm. Where when you pick your neighborhood class, you'll get obviously rent bumps, right? When you go to that kind of D class up to the A class or B class or whatever.
You buy in D class?
I have one build. My 40 unit, I would probably call that a C minus D plus type neighborhood. That's probably
area or property.
Area.
Yeah. I'm scared.
That's probably my
learned my licks on those.
Yeah, that's probably my roughest neighborhood I'm in. But what I think you're really deciding there is how challenging are your tenants. I mean, that's the biggest.
Well, that's it.
That's
the whole enchilada right there.
Right.
I mean, I've had D-class properties where they cut a hole in the front door to pass the crack through. Okay, where people got killed behind it, around it, in front of it.
Yeah.
Where the cops blocked off the street to slow down the drug traffic, not stop it, just slow it down a little bit.
They got to get another car and walk.
Oh yeah, exactly. Make it a little more inconvenient.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't wish that shit on anybody.
Yeah.
Okay, life's too short for that brain damage. Your collections are terrible. They destroy the units.
Yeah.
And typically, there's a lot of functional obsolescence in that demographic with the properties themselves. Mm-hmm. Rooms are too small, ceilings are too low, windows are small, and there's just a lot of deferred maintenance typically.
Yeah.
A lot of turnover, and it's just a lot of work. And,
it is.
And so I try to talk people out of buying C minus D, even C right now, because that demographic is getting killed right now. I'm single and I never had to buy groceries before, and I'm like, holy crap, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And filling up my car and things like that. I never thought about that, but it's I don't know, a lot of people, I don't know how some people make it, candidly, and that C demographic's getting their butts handed to them right now too.
Absolutely.
That's
to your point with that, and that's my concern with inflation.
Mm-hmm.
I love inflation, as we all know. We own assets. That's how we grow our wealth through our inflation of our assets.
It's not pleasant for tenants.
My concern is, after the big run-up we had the last 4 years, if this trend continues, if we still see high inflation the next 4 years, let's say, where does the music stop for our tenants? That's my concern.
Their income has to increase.
Right.
Everything has to increase.
Yeah.
And I unfortunately, I hope I'm wrong, but I think it's inevitable that those things are going to happen. But a lot of pain will come in conjunction with all that. We'll see. Maybe some of this stuff Trump's doing can thwart that. Maybe these tariffs can help with that. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's way beyond my economic expertise, but
well, that's the challenge.
It's fascinating, though.
That's the challenge for investors, right? Is that we the last couple of years we have been in just a cycle of volatility. Mm-hmm. Ups and downs and unknowns and interest rates and inflation and all these other things that we have no control over.
Right.
When you go back to the fundamentals of real estate, the reason why I chose to invest in real estate 10 years ago instead of stocks or bonds or whatever else is that I knew I had some modicum of control over real estate.
Right.
Well, all of these things we're talking about are the aspects of real estate you can't control.
Right.
And that makes it inherently uncomfortable.
Sure.
Because these aren't things you can put your hand around. These are things you just got to ride the wave and deal with. Do I believe in the fundamentals of real estate?
You go in
Absolutely.
conservatively. You go in conservatively. You raise more money than you think you need. You just you stress test like crazy. I haven't bought an asset in the last year, 14 months. I haven't bought anything.
Yeah.
Just because it's still crazy. But I believe deals are coming in a big way. I mean, I was looking at assets a couple of weeks ago. They're selling for the debt. A bunch of them. A bunch of big multifamily complexes selling for the debt.
Yeah.
They still don't make sense with the interest rates. So these lenders are going to have to take haircuts. But when they do, I think there's going to be some incredible opportunity. But you still go in conservatively, pie in the sky stuff. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And the problem with, I agree absolutely with what you're saying, but these are the same conversations we've been having like on the Best Ever podcast for the last 2 years, because 2 years ago people thought these deals were coming. And,
I know. And
yeah.
then they're like, oh, you're full of shit. You've been saying that for 3 years. And I get that hate all the time. But the bottom line is it's going to happen.
Yes.
It has
it's
to.
just a matter of when and
yeah,
how.
That's
and
it.
what
It has
like.
to, unless the rates come way down.
Yeah.
There's, these lenders, the catchphrase is extend and pretend.
Right.
They're doing deferrals and loan modifications, trying to keep these properties off their books.
Yep.
But at some point, I read a lot of commercial real estate news, and they're talking that they're finally starting to foreclose and take some of these properties back, and they're going to have to discount them to sell them.
Yes.
They can't stay on their books because they go on their balance sheet.
I think that's the main question.
When? Mm-hmm.
How big of how many defaults?
Well, there's so much debt that's due right now. There's so much debt that's in trouble right now. It's staggering. I mean, I hear my SEC attorney is totally focused on loan workouts and foreclosures right now, and he got 3 or 4 foreclosure clients last weekend. Big multifamily properties. And so, yeah.
And I think a lot of this with, like you said, the lenders, a lot of these lenders have their head in the sand. I think a lot of this is back in, 07, 08, when the market started falling out, the lenders just jumped and took everything that they, everything. You missed two loan payments. They were foreclosing on you.
It was mostly single family.
Right. It was a lot of single family.
This is different. I mean, these are.
But even on the multifamily side, in commercial, where they took assets, I think the lenders quickly realized, oh, we suck at this. We don't want to manage these properties. We would rather renegotiate a worse deal for us to let these operators that
continue
are
to manage. Yeah,
right. And that's ultimately.
I think you're dead on with that analysis.
Yeah,
actually, I think you're dead on with that because I'm seeing that. I mean,
yes, I think that's why lenders are.
We've
so
got
flexible.
a portfolio in Cincinnati that my ex-partner ran into the ground, and that lender has been kicking the can down the curb
because they don't want to take it.
Sometimes I'm surprised by it, candidly.
Yes.
I'll talk about that more when we're offline, but just because you're there. But yeah, no. So let me ask you this. What do you think is your superpower in this business that has contributed to your success?
Yeah, so I tell people all the time, my biggest strength is that I'm willing to buy the properties that nobody else wants. And I look at that lens, not from a location standpoint, but from the amount of value add needed. I have done, structural foundations. I've bought deals where we had to do additions to make it work. Same
on all the fronts.
We raised the roof on the 3rd floor instead of like one of those little dormer roofs.
That's a big one.
Things like that. We're making them full size units. Things. So I bought a duplex in a little town called Norwood in Cincinnati. You may be familiar with, but it was the entire main beam of this building. It's actually a triplex, had collapsed. So we had to lift the whole house up, replace all the beams. So just deals like that, the last 10 years, at least in my market.
Well, you don't have any competition.
Yeah. These are ones that are sitting on MLS or sitting on LoopNet. Maybe they're off market, whatever it may be. And it's a competitive advantage because 99% of your investors out there aren't going to touch it.
Right.
Or they don't have the experience, or they don't have the means, or they don't have the team, whatever it may be. There's something holding them back from making those deals.
What's interesting is I've got a friend, I haven't talked to him in a long time, but he had a business replacing gas oil tanks up in the Northeast where they have oil
furnaces
driven furnaces and all that, and these things would leak and nobody would buy them because of the EPA issues, and he got some phenomenal same kind of a dynamic.
Right.
Nobody's going to buy them, but he's got the business to replace the tanks and clean it up, and so he cleaned up on a bunch of houses. But interesting. So you've been at this a while. I love to talk about setbacks, and I call them seminars.
Sure.
Give us an example of a doozy, where you got your ass handed to you, and maybe a lesson involved.
Oh, absolutely. So
we have tons of them. Both of us have tons of them. But yeah.
So I'm working on a deal right now. It's a pain. It's a 5-unit in Northern Kentucky, a little city called Covington.
Oh, because you're right over the border.
Yeah,
in
right there.
That's
yeah.
right.
So it's this is 10 minutes from downtown Cincinnati, right across the river. The deal itself fundamentally is fine. There's nothing wrong with the intrinsic numbers of the deal. I didn't buy it wrong, anything like that. The problem with this deal is what I found out after the fact. So lesson learned, I didn't do enough research of the local zoning, building department. because there's a little town right next to it called Newport, and there's a big levee on the river. It's kind of a touristy thing, where I'd heard the horror stories of that building department. A lot of people don't go there. They're terrible to work with. They fight you on everything. But Covington didn't have that reputation. So I buy this building with a partner, and it took us almost a year to get our permits on this building. So the problem is the city of Covington, who's actually good to work with because they want to see renovation, right? This was a vacant for years. They wanted to see something done with this property. The problem was the county is the one that ultimately issues all the actual construction permitting. They don't care. They don't care. I don't know if you can cuss on the show. I was about to.
Yes, we cuss all the time.
Okay.
Yeah,
so they don't give a shit, right? So it's like you're and here's the problem. I picture like a Venn diagram, right? And the middle is where they agree. Well, you got to get everything on this project in that middle, and that middle is real small.
Wow.
So what the historical and the city level want, and what the county and the building permit level want, totally different things, right? So it's almost impossible to get them to agree on actual permitting plans.
Wow.
Because they want different things. So you can imagine from modern building code, which is the county level, they want everything to be, like type 3B construction. They use the National Building Code. Well, when you're talking about 125-year-old building, a lot of that doesn't apply.
No.
And you can't make it apply. There's not even a way to retrofit it to apply.
Right.
So huge lessons learned on the permitting side. And even with all my construction experience up to that point, this is a deal I bought probably 2 years ago. I mean, we're just now getting ready to drywall.
No kidding.
I mean,
finally. Wow.
So, I'm taking a hit on the holding costs, obviously.
Sure.
I'm taking a hit on
well, your building materials have gone
building
up.
material costs, all of those things, just for the project that gets delayed out that long. And part of it's my fault. It's not just all these other things. I mean, I've been inundated with all these other projects, all these client projects.
You didn't give it enough attention.
It kind of just, it gets put on the back burner. And
when your focus is diluted, it impacts everything. Yeah.
Well, and it's like when it's pulling teeth to do anything, you don't want to deal with it.
Yeah.
It
becomes a stepchild. No, I get it completely. Yeah, whenever you're dealing, by the way, with the city or county, always follow up your verbal communication in writing by email and get acknowledgments, because they change their freaking minds, and then they'll tell you they didn't say you
and find out who all was involved. That was my mistake. So I met with the city.
Okay.
So I did that part. I thought I had my bases covered because the city was great. They're like, oh, we're so happy you guys are buying this. This has been on our condemned list for years, whatever. They were very supportive. Whatever you need, you need help with. What I didn't know was that they only approve a very small subsection of these permits. Everything else goes to the county. That's Kenton County. Well, Kenton County, like I said, they don't give a shit. They don't care if you do it or not. They're not getting anything out of it other than whatever the permit fee. So they fought us tooth and nail on every single thing we wanted to do to this property. Like I said, it took us over a year. Part of that was hiring the wrong architect. There was a lot of mistakes.
Was there a good old boy component to all that?
So what we learned working with our architect.
Sometimes you see that in a municipality. There's a good old boy network.
Well, so they do have their kind of golden childs, which in some neighborhoods we are that guy. So it's great, right? So it's I've been on both sides of that.
Right.
But it's what I learned working with this architect is we over disclosed what the way things get done here in this little niche is they just don't tell them. Gotcha. They just do it.
Just do it.
And then, and if they call you out on something, okay, we'll get it drawn up. But a lot of this is, it's kind of a don't ask, don't tell thing.
Gotcha.
And we went into this like, here's everything we want to do.
Open the kimono, and that was the mistake.
Yeah, we were extremely transparent.
No, that's very helpful.
To a fault.
And guys, that's very valuable information if you ever do large projects. Okay, well that's
you got to learn to play the game within that little neighborhood. And everyone's different. Unfortunately, I wish I could give you some catch-all advice, but you got to learn how to play their game. That's how
you got to kiss ass. You've got to go in there and meet them and let them see you and all that. So, I have a lot of listeners like you do on your podcast that want to do this business. They want to do what you're doing. They have a 9-to-5 job. Maybe they're a police officer. By the way, thank you for that. That's good work. Or they're who knows, IT. They're own their own business, whatever it is. But they know they need more, and they want to do this on the side. What advice would you have for them?
I think if you want to build a path out of your job, just like I did. You have to do it at whatever level you're comfortable. I've seen people who've tried to do that and they go really big and then maybe they fall on their face. And as you know, having done small and large deals, if you make a mistake on a small deal, it's a lot easier to come back from. Maybe you're talking $10,000 or $20,000. Even an average career, you can work your way out of that mess.
Right.
If you make a big mistake on a
Big deal.
$2 million deal, and all of a sudden it's $500,000 mistake you got to pay for, that could be a life changer, right?
Well,
so
it could be a business life ending.
Yes, right. Yeah, maybe you go bankrupt or ruin your reputation, whatever, right? A lot of bad things can happen. So my advice is always, you can only go as fast as you're comfortable. And I don't want to say that every deal you should feel comfortable, because every time I step
every
up to
time you go
deal,
bigger, you're uncomfortable.
You should. You better be, right? Especially if you're
should
taking
have some
people's
fear.
money.
I say the life of your dreams is just on the other side of some comfort.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So you're going to get uncomfortable,
especially if you're raising money or you're partnering with people.
Sure.
Yeah, if you don't feel a little scared doing this business, then something's wrong with you.
Right.
That's my perspective. But as far as like if you're building a path out of your career, you got to take those baby steps and build up. I started with a duplex, and then I went to a 6. And every step along the way, it was a little more complicated, a little more scale, but that led me into better deals because I now had more experience to build off of. I felt comfortable doing off market. I felt comfortable buying sight unseen. I felt comfortable partnering with people that were putting capital into my deals. And like I said, the deal we're working on right now is the first one we'll actually syndicate. But again, 10 years ago, I would have never felt comfortable raising $2 million. I had to grow.
Sure. To get to that point.
Right.
And I've heard different answers to that question. So how do you feel about education if someone wants to get into this?
Oh, I mean, education's everything. Like I said, I am stubborn. So I've never paid for courses. I've never paid for coaching.
Wow.
I am the type of person that I would rather learn the hard way, which I have over and over and over and over. But I don't think that I wouldn't give anyone that advice. I'm glad
because
I don't think my path was
you
the
pay
right
for
one.
speed. You pay for to minimize those mistakes.
Exactly.
So you don't have that $500,000 mistake.
Yes.
I was leading this question because I've got a coaching program and I have boot camps and my students own somewhere around 250,000 units that we know of. It's probably more than that, and so I'm a big proponent for education and love it and love what I do and I think it's a must-have. I didn't do it when I was building this thing and bought 2,000 houses. I never did any education.
So you're stubborn like me.
But I was. Well, there wasn't much available, candidly.
True.
I'm a lot older than you.
It's a lot easier nowadays to learn. Yes.
But I show this picture at my boot camps where I've got like hundreds of lanyards around my neck and on my arms, and from all the boot camps and the masterminds and the workshops that I've gone to, and that's the education,
yes.
and that's the piece. And there's so much special. I'm in coaching right now. I've got a relationship coach. I had a speaking coach for a TEDx talk I'm going to do, and I believe in education. It's not just me trying to sell education. Sure. I really eat my own cooking. And I think you have to be a reader as well.
Yes.
You saw my library downstairs.
Yes.
That's I think critical, that you're continually educating yourself. You're continually curious, and I can tell you are.
Yeah.
That's
why I'm here.
I want to
have this conversation.
Yeah, and guys, I like this guy because I asked him why he was here, and usually there's an agenda. I'm trying to raise some money. I need some this or that. He just wanted to get out there and add value, and I just have a lot of admiration for that. Usually there's an agenda, and there's no agenda with you, so I really admire that. So in this journey of yours, tell me about any aha moments you had or epiphanies. We're like, holy crap, now I get it.
Okay.
What comes to mind? We may have already addressed a couple.
Yeah, I would say so. I think the most life-changing epiphany I've ever had, especially when it comes to this path I ultimately went down, was like I said, when I was about 25. I realized there's a lot of examples in my world that I don't want to be.
Gotcha.
And that was a huge motivation I've got to change my life. And if nothing else, I'm going to pad my retirement. But ultimately, I ended up building a path where I could replace my income with cash flow and get out of my day job. And again, that's not what I set out to do. Actually, my initial goal, 2015, I remember writing it down literally on like a napkin. My goal was I want to have 10 units in 10 years. And I thought that was like,
oh yeah,
next
like
impossible.
Holy crap!
Like how would you even do?
Right,
again, this is before I'd even bought a property,
wow.
a rental property. And so I think I hit that in like 2 years. Once I started buying. So I was like, okay, like this is doable. I can build this path out. So that was a huge epiphany. I think the second biggest one, and this is more of a personal thing.
Yeah.
But so I had my first. I was married, and we had our first daughter in 2017. We ended up divorcing in 2019. got with my new fiance, we had our first child, my second, in I think we found out she was pregnant, let's say 21. I guess it was right before I left. But that was the big catalyst for getting out. So as you mentioned, we all know what happened in 2020.
So you got a
with law
divorce
enforcement.
while you were still a cop.
Yes, I was still a police officer.
And then in 21 they did all this defund the police
Exactly.
crap.
So I started in 2020, right? I saw the writing on the wall with the way the country was going.
Yeah.
There was a lot of animosity towards police, law enforcement around the country. I already felt underpaid and underappreciated,
Sure.
and then it got worse. I realized my businesses were making more money than my career.
Yeah.
So it was like this, from a math standpoint, it just doesn't make sense to do this anymore. I was working 50 hours a week as a cop and 20 hours a week on my businesses and making more money than my job, right?
Right.
And so one thing that really stuck with me, as much as I loved being a cop and I love the departments I work for and I miss all the guys I worked with, I remember when I took 2 weeks off for my first daughter being born, it was like the end of the world. I got so much crap.
You mean from
the department,
Okay.
it was in the summer. I was messing up people's vacations. And it was something that really stuck with me of like, man, this is a really important thing in my life.
Right.
And to have to feel guilty the entire time I'm not at work, that was one of those aha moments
that's an aha moment.
I need to, I built a blueprint. Yeah, I built a blueprint here. I need to figure out a way to actually get out of here, make a real path.
So you build a blueprint. That's really important,
Yeah.
and I think, and just to talk about my Warriors again, we give a blueprint because you got to have a plan.
Yeah.
Fail to plan to fail, right? You need a plan, you need a blueprint, and it's awesome that you did all this yourself. So what drives you? I mean, what gets you to jump out of bed and do what you do? What's the why?
I think for me, people have asked me this, and I wish I had like a very clear-cut answer, but I think the simplest way is I had a great lower middle class life growing up, so I don't want to take anything away from my parents, and they did the absolute best they could for me.
Right.
And I had a great childhood.
Right.
But I knew, even as a child, that I wanted to do more for my kids. I wanted my kids to have a better opportunity than I did. And again, I'm not going to say poor me.
So it's about the kids.
Yeah,
No,
but
good.
My family, I have 3 kids now.
Wow.
We're done. That was it.
Yeah.
So three and out. But
it.
I knew I wanted to give my kids an experience and a life that I didn't have. And again, no poor me. It wasn't like I had some
have you been doing
horrible
that?
life.
Have you been doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, we bought the lake house.
Nice.
That was a big thing for me because I really wanted to every summer have that really dedicated family time. The boat, all that stuff, right? And so for me, that was super important.
Yeah.
I wanted to build a life for my family that I never had. I wanted to build opportunities and experiences for my family I never had. So I think that's the most fundamental why for me.
Gotcha.
But also, like, personally, back to the cop thing, it's like I knew I didn't want to be beholden to someone else's schedule and expectations. I wanted to be beholden to my own.
Tell me your craziest cop story.
Oh man, there's so many.
I know, right? But or one or two crazy.
Well,
ones.
I was gonna say I have a really funny one.
Funny. Funny's good.
It's a little graphic. I don't know.
That's all right.
Okay.
I don't care.
I mean, it's not horribly graphic, but
No, I want to hear it.
Could be a little off-putting.
That's all right.
All right, so I'll tell that one. This is one my friends always make me tell. So
Okay, good.
Okay, so this is probably 2020. I get a call at like 2:30 in the morning. About a guy knocking on a massage parlor door. So we had this place. It was literally called Oriental Massage.
Okay.
In our
Well,
little
we
town.
know how those go. Correct.
Okay, right. So we had heard the rumors of some of the services they offered, all this stuff. I think the fire department had done some like little undercover sting where they went in and acted like they were checking smoke detectors to try to catch them doing something. Long story short, the city didn't really care. They kind of let them do their thing. Right. Unless people were complaining, they didn't care.
Right.
So we get a call at 2:30. This guy, across the street, we have a UDF, a little gas station in Cincinnati. They say, hey, this guy's drunk. He's stumbling around. He's banging on the door. He's being loud. We don't know what he's doing. So I go over there, find him sleeping in his car in the back lot. Mm-hmm. I wake him up. I'm like, hey, what are you doing? I heard you were banging on a massage place. And he's like, yeah. Usually they're open until 4 a.m. And I was like, well, I said, I think they're closed. All their lights are out. And I was like, what are you doing over here? He's like, oh, I just came here to get a massage. I was like, you came here to get a massage at 2:30 a.m.? I was like, I could smell you've been drinking, all that. And he's like, yeah. And I was like, so you came here for like a rub and tug, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And he's like, I can't confirm or deny that.
Right.
So, basically admits to it. And I'm like, look, man, I was like, where do you live? He's like, I live right down the street. I said, okay. So he lived in like the next town over, 5 minutes down the road. I'm like, look, I was like, I'm gonna be nice. I'm not gonna charge you anything. Leave your car here. You've been drinking. I'm gonna take you home. I said, you can come get your car tomorrow, or whatever. And he wasn't driving or anything, so I couldn't get him for DUI or whatever. But so I put him in the car. drive him down the
Well,
street,
that was nice of you.
take him home.
Okay, right.
And so I get him out of the car, and I started getting him out, and I'm like, look, I said, I've been very cool with you. I said, I didn't charge you with anything, but I do have to tell your wife what you were doing.
Oh,
And he
wow.
goes ballistic. I mean, this guy's screaming, he's cussing, you know, he's making a scene, and like, you know, we're right in his driveway. There's houses everywhere. I'm like, dude, like, relax, calm down. I'm just messing with you. Oh, he was actually begging.
Oh, you were kidding. Oh, you were kidding. Oh, God.
He was actually begging me to take him to jail. He actually asked me to take him to jail instead of telling his wife what he was doing. And so the funniest part about that, so, you know, he's like freaking out. I get him inside, whatever.
Oh, God, that's funny.
The funniest part about that is, I record this entire story. You
had your camera on?
Well, so what happened is, if you recall, right around that time, this is right around March 2020, right? So COVID lockdown.
Right.
I just got on TikTok, right?
Okay.
TikTok had just kind of became public or whatever, like prevalent.
Right.
This is like the first TikTok I ever recorded. I tell this story, you know.
Okay.
And it goes viral like immediately.
No kidding.
Yeah. I mean, I had like 10,000 views in like 10 minutes, right?
Oh, that's awesome.
Well, the funniest. So I immediately get a message from TikTok saying that I use a derogatory term in my video.
Right.
And I'm like, what are you talking about? So I challenged it, where you can like appeal it. You can appeal. It was a ban. They banned my video. So I appealed it. And they said, you use the term Oriental massage. And I'm like, that's literally what the name of it is. I say it's literally called Oriental massage. So the funniest part is my video got banned right after it went viral. But yeah, that was
that's hilarious.
That's the party story. That's what when I'm at a party,
I
a
like
cocktail party, or whatever. Everybody asks for that story.
Oh my God, you scared the shit out of that guy. That's hilarious.
He was terrified.
Wow,
yeah, it was a good one.
That's awesome. So, Joe, what's your favorite part of what you do? What do you enjoy the most in what you do?
That's a great question. So there's a few things, but something that comes to mind a lot. So at the beginning of this year, I merged with one of my best friends and business partners. We merged actually our construction companies.
Oh, wow.
So he had his own, I had my own. And we had worked closely and shared contractors and all those things, but we officially merged at the beginning of the year. Well, we had this kind of company party where we brought all our guys together and all our contractors and kind of announced, hey, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. And one of the things that came out of that meeting was trying to really hit home with our guys and everyone who works for us, is that as real estate investors, as contractors, as builders, as all these things that we do under our company, at the end of the day, we're providing housing and we're providing a service for these people. And when you're dealing with annoying tenants and you're dealing with leaking toilets and you're dealing with people complaining, which is a lot of the job, right? You get removed from that. You know, you get removed from that wanting to deal with that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But if you can refocus yourself to realize that these people at whatever income level, whatever class of building they're in, you have an opportunity to provide them a great place to live, a safe place to live. You can provide great customer service on the management side, and you're going to really be a big part of these people's lives. You know, I think a lot of investors look at this as like, you know, I got 1,000 units, I got 10,000 units. They don't necessarily care about that individual tenant, but that individual tenant's life is vastly shaped by your decisions and by how well you run your business. And I try to really send that home to our employees of like, I know these people get annoying. I know when you're dealing with the same maintenance issue over and over, you know, the day to day, every day runs together, right? When you're doing, our work. Sure. But when you take a step back and think of the big picture, why are we here? Why are we doing this? Why are people paying us to live in our properties? Why are we providing the services we provide? I think you can drill down to that human level, and I think it helps separate.
You think you resonated with your guys?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
You know, and every once in a while, I've told this story before, but like we did a student rental, right? And so this is University of Cincinnati, right in the heart of Cincinnati, pretty rough neighborhood. But like right when you get out of the campus, I mean, it can get rough. I went to school there, so I lived down there. I dealt with all this. We had a group of girls move into a house. We gutted, full gut like everything else, and they were literally sobbing the day on their move-in day because they could not believe how beautiful. Oh, wow. And these are like spoiled rich girls, right? And just to go from where they were living as sophomores or whatever, right? I mean, literally
on campus, crappy little
roaches, rats, whatever, right? I mean, you're talking about some rough housing around the university. To live in this beautiful building that we made. I mean, I think the guys that were there on their moving day,
they were moved.
I mean, they were moved, and we all were. I mean, it was cool. It was like oh, wow, there's a little more to what we're doing than just money and freedom.
Nice.
And, there's a little deeper meaning to it.
Nice. That's a great place to end. That's a great message that you just shared. Well, I appreciate you coming down, brother. I know you're here for a wedding. It just worked out perfectly.
Yeah. It's an awesome experience, man. I appreciate you having me.
Likewise.